That's what I wanted to talk to you about
Yeah.
because the myth of stoicism, which is
Yeah.
funny because my family calls me stoic all the time. They're
Mm.
like, "You're like a robot, like you don't express your emotions." And it's like
Mm.
the stoics, they they transmute their emotions. So you don't outwardly express it, you inwardly transmute it
Mm.
so it looks like you're not like out there expressing it, but you really processed it already.
Mm.
And the Stoics call it emotional wisdom, not
Mm.
emotional suppression. But I wanted to get your thoughts on it because the Stoic leadership, where it's like just suck it up. I think that's a misinterpretation of Stoicism because most people just say like, oh, like in a modern context, they're like, oh, they're stoic, like they don't have no, like my sister called me the other day ago a rock. She's like, you're like a stone rock, like like you don't express your emotions, but it's like really I'm expressing my emotions like 24/7 within myself.
Mm.
I just don't like outwardly show it.
Yeah. So I think, in Western cultures, we're not talking like Zen Buddhism here. We have this idea
Hmm.
of like rationality or reason is the thing that
Hmm.
separates human animals from the rest of the animals out there. That
Hmm.
our reason or capacity for it is what makes us more akin to God than akin to, like, or closer to other animals. And that, like,
Hmm.
myth, that belief has done something where we've historically prioritized like logic, reason, and willpower as like a virtue over things like emotion and intuition and connection. And
Hmm.
when we prioritize or like kind of separate those two, we get into a situation where we kind of discount the value of what emotions are. And if we look at like the neuroscience, like there's Descartes' Error is the name of a book by a neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. I'm not Italian, so I don't know if I'm saying his name right. I apologize. But he talks about how he came across these guys who had had injuries to their brain where the part of the emotional center of the
Hmm.
brain was dampened. They couldn't actually access it. So they literally just had logic and reason. They had no ability
Wow.
to access their emotion because of some head traumas that they'd experienced. So he'd ask them, hey, do you want to come back in on Tuesday or Thursday next week? And they would go through a reasoning process for 45 minutes. Well, on Tuesday, there might be some rain, so it could be more dangerous on Tuesday than on Thursday. But, sometimes meteorologists are wrong about the rain, so who knows? Maybe it'll be better. And the
There's like
traffic
no
on Tuesday,
feeling.
no feel. And they couldn't actually come to a logical conclusion. They couldn't ever arrive at making a decision to move
Mm,
forward because they couldn't access the other part of reasoning, which is emotions. And so
mhm,
in historical ancient contexts, because we were so wanting to be, godlike in this like idea of what this pure being is and want to distance ourselves from animals, we had prioritized reason to the point of it being like this mythological, like actually caricature of itself. Because to really be good at reasoning, you have to be able to pull in emotion. You have to be able to
mhm,
be familiar
mhm,
with your emotional palette. Like, okay, this just happened. What am I experiencing? Where am I
yeah,
experiencing that? Why does it make me feel that way? Have I felt this way before? What's similar or different now in this moment from that previous moment? How have I changed since then? What have I learned or grown or done? And
mhm,
that like emotional palette, that like emotional regulation process is
mhm.
so important. And if we don't have access to that stuff, and we don't work through it, it still stays inside of our body. It still creates this like tension
Yeah, why do you
until
think
we act on
people,
it.
yeah, why do you think people do that? You think it's just taught from society and the Western culture?
Absolutely. Yep. I think it's that we discounted emotions. We think emotions are
Weak?
dangerous. Yeah, that if you can't control your emotions, you're weak.
Mm,
That if your emotions control you, you're less of a person. You're more animalistic. You're less than. You're a second or a third class citizen. And we see that in a lot of language, like man up, like, or don't be such a little, you're in the military and you see all those, the drill instructors yelling at the recruits there, the troops,
Yeah, for me it was always because I have a naturally soft-spoken voice.
Hmm.
So it was like, speak up, speak up.
From here. Yeah. Yeah. And I think anytime we like discount the human experience in any way, we're like sacrificing something of ourselves that's important, because it's that like wide like pendulum swing of the human experience that's important to honor. If we like corral it off in this corner, we're going to sacrifice one thing to the other. We're going to end up worse off than we would be otherwise.
So what do you recommend people who have trouble or are suppressing, maybe consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, they're suppressing their emotions?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been taught that displaying emotion is like not appropriate, or at least in the work context, it's not professional. And to be fair, like when you're a toddler and you're like overstimulated, you're hungry, you're tired, your behavior is going to reflect your experience. As an adult, we expect a little bit different. You can be hungry and tired, but we still expect you to behave like an adult. That's not what we're talking about here. But if we don't go in and be like, if we feel an emotion, instead of saying like, oh, what am I feeling? And we just try to maintain our composure as an adult, doing adult things, being very professional, and we never go back to understand what that's going on, that's where we see a lot of people struggle with cardiovascular disease, with like longer term stress response stuff. They get outside of their window of tolerance and they get into a chronic stress state. Some of the first studies done on burnout in the workplace were with like ICU nurses, where when they're doing their job, they're watching terrible stuff that most people can't stomach the sight of. That's just every day for them. If you're at a Starbucks and you're getting your coffee and you're like steaming milk and spilling some on the counter, oh well. But when you're an ICU nurse, the spilled milk on the counter isn't spilled milk, it's something else. And they still have to maintain that professionalism and that composure. And in those settings, it doesn't help the client, the patient that they're trying to save, to have their emotions overwhelm them in that moment. So they hold on to it, they put it aside, they compartmentalize so they can get through their day and do a good job. But then at the end of their shift, they get so good at putting all of those things away. If they don't go back to revisit them, open them up and process them, that's where they end up burning out, because there's so much of that they're just like holding in and keeping
that
sequestered. It catches up with them. And then they end up being a good nurse eventually, because they've been so good at being a nurse in the moment that eventually that skill overrides their ability to show up in the long run. So it's challenging that way too.